By the time the gun touched the side of my head, I already understood two things. The first was that fear felt colder when it arrived after a choice, not before it. The second was that Adrian Volkov did not look dangerous when he was angry. He looked quiet, and that was worse. I was on the polished floor of his penthouse with one stranger behind me and two more near the broken wall of glass. Rain tapped against the windows. City lights spilled across the room in long silver bands. The man holding me used my shoulder as a shield and pressed the barrel harder when Adrian took one step forward. Nobody shouted. Nobody rushed. Even the guards who had survived the first burst of gunfire stayed still because they were waiting for him, not the situation. Adrian stood 10 feet away in a dark suit with blood from someone else on his cuff and a look in his eyes that made the room feel smaller. The man behind me barked an order for the cars downstairs and demanded a clear route out. Adrian ignored the order. He looked only at me. Then he spoke in the same low voice he used when he wanted a room to obey. She dies, the city burns. The words landed without force, but every man in that penthouse reacted like a trigger had been pulled. I remember thinking that no one bluffed with a line like that unless they had already decided what ruin would cost. 6 hours earlier, I had been standing under gold light in a restaurant that smelled like butter, rain, and money I would never touch. My hands ached from a double shift. My shoes were worn thin at the heels. Rent was due in 3 days, and my manager kept reminding me to smile like exhaustion was a personal failure. Outside, the city was slick with rain. Inside, crystal glasses flashed under chandeliers that probably cost more than my apartment building. I was balancing a tray near the back when the room changed without warning. Conversations lowered. Chairs adjusted. Men who had been too loud a second earlier remembered how to breathe. That was the first sign Adrian had arrived. I did not know his name yet. I only knew the effect. He moved through the room without hurrying and without wasting attention. He wore a dark suit with clean lines and no obvious bodyguards until you looked twice. He did not need to announce himself because the air did it for him. Everyone else watched him carefully while pretending not to. I told myself not to stare. Men like that did not notice waitresses except when something was missing from the table. Then I walked over with water and felt something off before I understood it. The feeling was thin and sharp, like a thread stretched too tight. I poured the glass. He barely looked at me. Then I saw the red dot. It sat on his chest, steady and small, just above his heart. For a second, I thought it was a reflection from the wine wall. The second after that, I knew it was not. Nobody else moved. Nobody else seemed to see it. Music kept playing. A woman near the bar laughed. Someone in the kitchen dropped a pan. The whole room stayed ordinary, while one impossible detail held still in front of me. I had time to step back and save myself. I had time to do what people like me always do around danger that belongs to richer, stronger people. Look down, keep moving, and go home alive. Instead, I chose the mistake that changed everything. The tray slipped from my hand. Glass exploded behind me. I drove my shoulder into Adrian and knocked him sideways, just as a shot cracked through the restaurant. The impact took both of us to the floor. A chandelier trembled. Guests screamed. A window burst near the entrance. I heard a second shot bury itself in wood, and somebody yelling for security. Arms grabbed me before I could breathe again. Adrian did not throw me off him. He stared at me like I had broken a rule he had never imagined anyone would touch. In less than a second, I had gone from invisible to impossible. One of his guards hauled me upright, while broken glass kept falling around us. They thought I was the problem the second his guards pulled me up from the floor, fingers tight around my arms. Not enough to hurt, but enough to remind me I did not belong there. Voices blurred together around us. Guests whispering, chairs scraping. Someone saying call the police and someone else saying absolutely not. But he stayed silent, still seated now, jacket slightly out of place. Eyes locked on me like I was the only thing that made sense in a room full of confusion. I tried to speak, but my throat felt dry, my heart still racing from what I had seen, from what I had done. I saw it. I finally managed, my voice barely steady. There was a red dot on your chest. The words sounded insane the second they left my mouth, like something out of a movie. Like something people would laugh off, but no one laughed. Not him, not the men surrounding him. Not the manager who suddenly looked like he regretted ever hiring me. One of the guards tightened his grip slightly, his expression unreadable. But then Adrian lifted a single hand, and everything stopped, just like that. No shouting, No questions, just silence. His authority moved faster than fear. "Let her go," he said quietly, and they did, immediately, stepping back like I was no longer a threat. Or maybe like I had become something else entirely. I rubbed my wrists without thinking, trying to ground myself. Trying to understand why he was still looking at me like that, like I had interrupted something important. Like I had crossed a line I could not see. "Explain," he said, his voice low, controlled, not angry, which somehow felt worse. I swallowed, forcing myself to meet his gaze. Even though every instinct told me to look away, I was pouring your water, and I saw it. A red dot, right here. I gestured to my chest, mirroring where I had seen it on him. No one else reacted. So I thought maybe I was wrong, but it did not move. It stayed steady, and I moved, I stopped there. Because there was nothing else to say, because even I did not fully understand why I had done it. The room stayed quiet for a long second, then another, and then one of the men near the entrance spoke into a small device. His voice sharp but controlled. "Check the perimeter," he said, and suddenly everything shifted again, not chaotic, but precise, deliberate, like a machine clicking into place. Adrian did not look away from me, not once. "You are certain of what you saw?" he asked, not as a question, but as a test. I nodded, more firmly this time. "Yes," my voice steadier now. "I am certain." Something flickered in his expression, not relief, not gratitude, something colder, more calculating, like he was rearranging pieces on a board only he could see. A few minutes later, one of his men returned, leaning in just enough to speak quietly, but not quietly enough that I could not hear. There was someone across the street, high vantage point. "They are gone now." A cold weight settled in my ribs, the confirmation hitting harder than the moment itself. I had not imagined it. I had not overreacted. I had stepped into something real, something dangerous. Adrian exhaled slowly, his gaze finally shifting away from me for the first time, but only briefly. Like I was still part of the equation. "Clear the room," he said, and within moments the restaurant began to empty. Guests ushered out with polite urgency, staff frozen in place until directed otherwise. I stood there, unsure if I should move, unsure if I was allowed to, until his attention returned to me fully, sharper now, more focused. "What is your name?" he asked. I hesitated, just for a second, then answered, "Emily." He nodded once, like he had expected that. Like my name fit into whatever story he was building in his mind. "Emily," he repeated, testing it, then stepped closer, not invading, but close enough that I could feel the weight of his presence. "You saw something no one else saw, and you acted when no one else did." His voice lowered, not for secrecy, but for emphasis. "People do not do that without a reason." I shook my head slightly. I did not think. I stopped again. Because the truth sounded too simple, too small for the situation. He watched me for another long moment, then said something that made my chest tighten in a completely different way. "That does not make this better," his tone calm, almost detached. "It makes it worse." I frowned, confused. "Worse," I repeated, and for the first time, something that almost resembled a smile touched his expression. But it did not reach his eyes, because now, he said quietly, "You are part of it." The words settled heavily between us. His men cleared the room around us while I stood there trying to catch my breath. Adrian kept watching me as the last shards were swept from the floor. The moment he said that, I felt something shift under my feet, like the ground had tilted just enough to throw me off balance. Not physically, but in a way that made everything feel unfamiliar. I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came out because I did not know what to say to a man who spoke like decisions had already been made. Like my future had been quietly adjusted without my permission. "I did not ask to be part of anything," I said finally, my voice steadier than I felt. He studied me again, not offended, not surprised, just observing, like resistance was expected and already accounted for. "No one ever does," he replied, and something about the way he said it made it sound less like a threat and more like a fact. One of his men approached and spoke quietly to him again. Something about vehicles being ready, about securing the area, about moving quickly. Words that did not belong in my world. Adrian nodded once, then looked back at me. "You are coming with me," he said, simple, direct. Like there was no alternative, my chest tightened immediately. No, I said before I could stop myself, the word coming out sharper than intended. A few of the guards shifted at that, but he did not react, not outwardly. You misunderstand, he said calmly. That was not a request. I felt heat rise in my face, a mix of fear and something else I had not expected, frustration. I have a job, I said, gesturing vaguely around the restaurant that was no longer functioning like a restaurant. I cannot just leave. He glanced around once, taking in the empty tables, the anxious manager standing near the bar pretending not to listen. The staff frozen in uncertainty. Then his gaze returned to me. You already did, he said quietly, and I realized he was right. Nothing about tonight could go back to normal, not after what I had seen, not after what I had done. I shook my head anyway, clinging to whatever control I thought I still had. I am not going anywhere, I said, this time more measured, more deliberate. For a second I thought he might argue, or push, or signal his men again, but instead he stepped closer, just enough that his voice did not need to carry. Emily, he said, my name sounding different when he said it, heavier somehow. Someone was watching me tonight, waiting for the right moment, and you interrupted that moment. His eyes held mine, steady, unwavering. Do you think that makes you invisible? The question settled into me slowly, uncomfortably. I did not answer, because I did not have one. Because deep down I already knew the answer. He continued, just as calm, just as precise. If they saw you move, if they saw you notice, then you are no longer just a waitress who finishes her shift and goes home. My breath stalled at that. The reality of it unfolding piece by piece, logical, unavoidable. I did not do anything except react, I said. But even to my own ears it sounded weak, incomplete. He tilted his head slightly, like he was considering that. Exactly, he said. You reacted faster than everyone else in that room. There was no praise in his voice, only acknowledgement, which somehow carried more weight. People like that do not ignore details, he added, and I understood then that he was not trying to scare me. He was explaining something. Something I needed to understand whether I wanted to or not. I looked down at my hands for a second, still trembling slightly, then back up at him. So what? I am supposed to just trust you and go wherever you say, I asked. The words coming out more bitter than I intended. A faint flicker crossed his expression again. Not quite amusement, not quite irritation. No, he said, surprising me. You are supposed to understand that staying here is not safer. Silence stretched between us again, heavier this time, more real. I glanced toward the exit, toward the street beyond the glass where everything looked normal, cars passing, lights changing, people walking like nothing had happened. Like my life had not just shifted in a direction I could not control. Then I looked back at him, at the certainty in his posture, the way everything around him seemed to align without effort, and I realized something I did not want to admit. He was not asking me to trust him. He was giving me the only option that made sense in a situation I did not fully understand. I exhaled slowly, my shoulders dropping just a fraction, not surrender, but acceptance of reality. If I go with you, I said carefully, this does not mean I belong to you. The words felt important, necessary, even if I did not know why. He held my gaze for a long second, then answered in a way that made my heartbeat lurch again. That depends on what happens next. And before I could ask what that meant, one of the guards opened the door behind him. The cool night air slipping inside, carrying the distant hum of the city, and Adrian stepped aside just enough to let me pass first. Like this was still my choice, even though we both knew it was not. I hesitated only for a second before I walked toward the door. The cold air hit me like a border I could not uncross. The night air hit me like a reality check the second I stepped outside, cool and sharp against my skin. Like it was trying to wake me up from something I had not agreed to be part of. The street looked normal, almost painfully normal. Cars passing by, headlights streaking across wet pavement. A couple arguing quietly on the corner, someone laughing into their phone. Life continuing like nothing had shifted. Like I had not just walked out of my own world and into his. A black SUV waited at the curb, engine running. The kind of car that did not ask questions and did not attract attention unless you knew what to look for. One of the men opened the rear door for me, his movements precise, practiced. I hesitated again, just for a second. Long enough to feel the weight of the decision settle in my chest. Then I got in. Because there was no version of tonight where I simply walked away and went back to counting tips and worrying about rent. The door closed behind me with a soft, final sound that felt louder than it should have. Adrian slid in beside me a moment later, the space shifting instantly, like the air itself adjusted to him. The interior smelled faintly of leather and something expensive I could not name. The city lights blurred past the tinted windows as the car pulled away, and for a few seconds neither of us spoke. I stared straight ahead, my hands folded in my lap to hide the way they still trembled, trying to piece together what came next, trying to understand what rules applied in a situation like this. "Where are we going?" I asked finally, my voice quiet but steady. He did not look at me right away, his gaze fixed out the window like he was tracking something only he could see. "Somewhere you will not be found," he said, and the words landed heavier than I expected, not dramatic, not threatening, just certain. I turned my head slightly, studying him in the dim light, trying to understand how someone could sound so calm while saying something that should have terrified me. "You keep saying that like it is a fact," I said, like something already decided. He shifted then, his attention moving fully to me. And for the first time since we left the restaurant, I saw something different in his expression, not softer, but more focused, more deliberate. "Because it is," he replied. The person who was watching tonight did not miss by accident. A small pause, just enough to let the meaning settle. They were interrupted. My breath caught again, the logic clicking into place whether I liked it or not. "By me," I said quietly. He nodded once. "Yes." The silence that followed felt heavier than anything he could have said. I looked down at my hands, then back up at him. "So what happens now?" I asked, because I needed to hear it. Needed to understand the shape of what I had stepped into. He leaned back slightly, his posture relaxed but controlled, like everything about him was intentional. "Now," he said, "we make sure you do not become a loose end." The words should have scared me, and maybe they did. But there was something in the way he said them that felt less like a threat and more like a boundary. Like he was defining the situation instead of creating it. I let out a slow breath, forcing myself to stay grounded. "That sounds a lot like I do not have a choice," I said. He watched me for a second. Then something almost imperceptible shifted in his expression. "You always have a choice," he said. "It is just that some choices come with consequences you cannot undo." I held his gaze, searching for something. Anything that felt human in the middle of all this control. "And what happens if I decide I do not trust you?" I asked. The question hanging between us, sharp and real. He did not hesitate. "Then you will learn very quickly that trust is not the first thing you need to survive this." The car turned smoothly onto a quieter street. The noise of the city fading slightly, replaced by something more controlled, more isolated. I glanced out the window, noticing the change. The way the buildings grew taller, the streets cleaner, the lights softer, like we were crossing into a different version of the same city. One I had never been part of. "You keep talking about survival," I said. "Like this is something I have to endure." He tilted his head slightly, considering that. "Not endure," he corrected. "Understand?" The distinction felt important. Even if I did not fully grasp it yet, the car slowed. Then came to a stop in front of a building that did not look like it belonged to the same world as the restaurant. Glass and steel rising into the night, quiet, controlled, almost too perfect. One of the men stepped out to open the door. But Adrian did not move right away. Instead, he looked at me again. A gaze so precise it felt like he was reading beneath the surface. "Emily," he said, my name steady, deliberate. "You saved my life tonight." I felt my breath catch slightly, not because of what he said, but because of how he said it. Like it mattered in a way I did not expect. He continued, just as calm, just as precise. "That does not disappear." A pause. Just long enough to let it sink in. "It changes things." I swallowed, not sure what that meant yet, not sure if I wanted to know. And as the door opened and the quiet of this new place settled around us, I realized something I had been trying not to admit. The elevator doors closed on our reflections before either of us said another word. The building felt too quiet the moment I stepped out of the car. Like even the city noise had been filtered out before it could reach this place. Glass doors sliding open without a sound. Warm light spilling onto polished floors that reflected everything too clearly. I hesitated just inside the entrance, my sneakers suddenly too loud against the marble. Too real compared to everything around me. People moved here differently, slower, more controlled, like nothing unexpected ever happened within these walls. And I did not belong in that rhythm. I could feel it immediately. Adrian walked past me without looking back, not checking if I followed. Not needing to. And somehow that made it harder to stay where I was. Like standing still was the only wrong move, so I followed. Because every step tonight had already proven that hesitation did not change the outcome, the elevator ride was silent. Just the low hum of movement and the soft reflection of us in mirrored walls. I caught a glimpse of myself and almost did not recognize the girl staring back, hair slightly out of place, uniform wrinkled, eyes too alert, too aware, standing next to a man who looked like he had never questioned his place in any room he entered when the doors opened. It was not just another floor. It felt like an entirely different world, wide open space, floor-to-ceiling windows. The city stretched out below like something distant and manageable, like chaos reduced to lights and motion far away. I stopped just inside, taking it in without meaning to, the scale of it, the silence, the way everything felt curated, controlled, untouched by anything unpredictable. You can stop looking like you are about to run. Adrian's voice cut through my thoughts, calm, almost casual. I turned toward him, folding my arms slightly, more for balance than defense. I am not running, I said. Even though a part of me had not stopped thinking about it since the moment I got in the car, he nodded once. Like he believed me, or at least understood the difference between thinking and acting. Good, he said, because that would complicate things. I let out a breath I did not realize I had been holding, my eyes drifting again to the windows. The distance between this place and the street below suddenly feeling more symbolic than physical. So this is where I stay, I said. Not quite a question. He stepped closer to a sleek counter, pouring a glass of water without asking, then setting it down within reach. Not forcing it, just placing it there, for now. He replied. I walked over slowly, my fingers brushing the edge of the glass before I picked it up, grounding myself in something simple, something normal. And what exactly am I supposed to do here? I asked, taking a small sip, the coolness steadying me just a little. He leaned back slightly against the counter, watching me with that same measured focus. Understand the situation you are in, he said. Like it was the most obvious answer in the world. I shook my head slightly, a small, almost disbelieving laugh escaping before I could stop it. You keep saying that like it is something I can just learn overnight, I said. He did not smile, but something in his expression shifted. Not softer, but more attentive. You learned fast enough to see what no one else did, he pointed out, and I could not argue with that. Even if I wanted to, I looked down at the glass in my hand, watching the way the light refracted through the water, then back up at him. That was instinct, I said. This is different. He straightened slightly, pushing away from the counter, closing the distance between us just enough to make the air feel heavier, more intentional. Instinct is how you survive the first moment, he said quietly. Understanding is how you survive everything after. The words settled into me slowly, not dramatic, not forced, just real in a way I could not ignore. I held his gaze, searching again for something I could define, something that made sense in a world that suddenly felt unfamiliar. And what happens if I decide I do not want to understand any of this? I asked. The question more honest than anything I had said so far. He did not answer immediately, just watched me for a long second, like he was measuring the weight of that question. Then finally he spoke, his voice steady, certain. Then you will keep reacting, he said. And eventually, you will not be fast enough. The room felt quieter after that, like even the air paused for a second. I looked away first this time, turning slightly toward the window, the city lights below no longer distant but overwhelming, each one a reminder that somewhere out there, someone had been watching, waiting, calculating, and I had stepped directly into that calculation without understanding the cost. I exhaled slowly, my reflection faint in the glass. I set the empty glass beside the window and watched the city until the water inside it stopped shaking. I stayed by the window longer than I meant to, watching the city move like nothing had changed while everything inside me felt rearranged. The glass cool under my fingertips grounding me in something real, something steady, but even that started to feel temporary. Like I was standing in a place that did not belong to me and might never will. You are thinking too far ahead, Adrian's voice came from behind me, calm, measured, like he had been watching me without needing to announce it. I did not turn right away, keeping my eyes on the lights below. I do not think I am thinking far enough, I replied quietly. And that made him pause. I felt it without seeing it, the shift in his attention sharpening. I turned then, facing him fully. You said this changes things, I continued. So what exactly am I supposed to prepare for? He studied me for a moment, not dismissing the question, not deflecting it, just weighing it like everything else. Then he moved past me toward a table where a tablet rested, tapping the screen once before turning it slightly in my direction. Come here, he said, not demanding, but certain I would listen. I hesitated only briefly before walking over, setting the glass of water down carefully, as if small controlled movements could keep everything else from unraveling. The screen lit up with an image, a still frame taken from somewhere across the street, grainy but clear enough. I recognized the restaurant immediately. The angle, the timing, and then I saw it, myself, frozen mid-motion, leaning toward him just before everything shifted. My breath caught slightly. This was taken seconds before you moved, Adrian said, his voice steady. I looked closer, my eyes scanning the image until I noticed something else. A faint reflection in the glass behind us, a shape, barely there but intentional, someone watching from a distance. That is where they were, he added, tapping the screen lightly, and suddenly it felt real in a way it had not before, not just a moment, not just instinct, but something planned, something deliberate. I straightened slightly, my arms crossing again without thinking. So they saw me, I said, the realization settling heavier now. He did not soften it. Yes, he answered simply, no hesitation, no attempt to make it easier. I exhaled slowly, my mind trying to catch up, to map out possibilities I did not fully understand. And you think they care? I asked, part of me hoping he would say no, that I had been insignificant in the larger picture, but he shook his head slightly. I do not think, he said. I know how people like that operate. His tone shifted just enough to make me realize this was not theory. This was experience, lived and understood. They plan, they observe, and when something disrupts that plan, they do not ignore it. I looked back at the screen, at the version of me captured in that single frame, and it felt strange, like looking at someone else. Someone who had made a decision without understanding the consequences. I did not even know what I was interrupting, I said quietly, more to myself than to him. He stepped closer then, not invading, but present. That does not matter, he replied. What matters is that you did. The certainty in his voice left no room for argument. I looked up at him, searching again for something I could hold on to. So what happens now? I asked, the question familiar but heavier this time, more informed. He turned the tablet off, the image disappearing instantly, like the moment had been erased, but not forgotten. Now we find out who was watching, he said, and why they chose that moment. I frowned slightly, processing that. And me, I added, because it felt incomplete otherwise. He met my gaze again, steady, unflinching. And we make sure they do not get close enough to matter again. The way he said it was not dramatic, not threatening, just controlled. Like a decision already in motion. I let that settle for a second, then shook my head slightly. A small, almost incredulous reaction slipping through. You talk about this like it is something you can control completely, I said. He did not deny it, did not even hesitate. Not completely, he corrected. But enough. There was something in that confidence that should have been reassuring. But instead it made me more aware of the gap between his world and mine, the way he measured risk, the way he responded to it. And where do I fit into that? I asked, because I needed to understand my place in all of this. He was quiet for a second, just long enough to make me think he might not answer. Then he said something that shifted everything again. You are the variable they did not plan for, his voice low, deliberate, which makes you both a risk and an advantage. I blinked, caught off guard by that. That does not sound like something I should be comfortable with, I said. He almost smiled then, just barely, but it faded before it fully formed. You are not supposed to be comfortable, he replied. And somehow that honesty felt more real than anything else he had said. I glanced once more toward the window, toward the city that still moved like nothing had changed, and then back at him, realizing that comfort had never really been part of this. Not from the moment I saw that red dot, not from the moment I chose to move, and now. He slid the tablet toward me, and the grainy image of the sniper angle stayed between us on the table. Sleep did not come the way it normally should have, not like after a long shift where exhaustion pulled me under without asking questions. This felt different, like my body was tired but my mind refused to let go. Replaying every second of the night in fragments that would not line up cleanly, the red dot, the impact, his voice. The way everything had shifted without warning. I stood in the unfamiliar bedroom staring at the city through another wall of glass. The skyline stretching endlessly like a reminder that I was still in the same place, but no longer living the same life. The room itself was quiet, too quiet. Everything in it arranged with intention, a bed that looked untouched, a chair perfectly aligned. Even the lighting felt controlled, like nothing here was accidental. I rubbed my hands together slowly, trying to release the tension that had not left since the restaurant. And for the first time since arriving, I let myself think about something simple. Leaving, the idea came quietly, almost cautiously, like it was testing whether it still belonged to me. I glanced toward the door, half expecting it to be locked, but when I stepped closer and turned the handle, it opened easily, no resistance, no alarm. Just a hallway stretching out under soft lighting, empty and silent. I stood there for a second, uncertain, because this was not what I expected, not what I had prepared for. I stepped into the hallway anyway, my footsteps careful, controlled. As if the sound itself could trigger something I did not understand, I followed the corridor back toward the main space. The city still visible at the far end, Adrian standing there exactly where I had left him, like he had not moved at all. He did not turn when I approached, did not acknowledge me immediately, which somehow made the moment feel less confrontational and more intentional. Like he was giving me space to decide something on my own. The door is not locked, I said finally, breaking the silence. He nodded once. Still looking out at the city. I know, he replied. I frowned slightly, stepping closer. You said I could not just walk away, I said. But you did not stop me. Now he turned, his gaze settling on me with that same steady focus. Stopping you would not change anything, he said. It would only delay your understanding of it. I crossed my arms again. Not out of defense, but because it gave me something to hold on to. And if I walked out right now, I asked. Testing the edges of what he was saying, he held my gaze without hesitation. You would make it 3 blocks before you realized you were being followed. The certainty in his voice sent a knot through me. Not because it sounded like a threat, but because it sounded like experience, like something he had already accounted for. And then what? I pressed. He took a small step forward, closing the distance just enough to make his presence more defined. Then you would have to decide whether you trust your instincts again, he said quietly, or pretend you do not see what is happening. I looked away for a second, the weight of that choice settling in deeper than I expected. Because I knew exactly what he meant. I had already been there once, already made that decision without thinking, and it had changed everything. You are not keeping me here, I said after a moment, needing to say it out loud, needing to hear it. He shook his head slightly. No, he said. I am showing you that leaving does not return you to what you had before. His honesty was unsettling. Not because it was harsh, but because it left no room for illusion. I exhaled slowly, my shoulders dropping just a fraction. The tension shifting into something more focused, more aware. So what do you expect from me? I asked, my voice quieter now, more grounded. He studied me for a long second before answering, like he was measuring something, not my words but my reaction. I expect you to keep doing what you already did, he said. Notice what others miss. Act when it matters. And do not ignore what feels wrong. I blinked slightly, caught off guard by that. That sounds like survival advice, I said. He nodded once. It is, he replied. Simple, direct. I let that settle for a moment. Then asked the question that had been building since I stepped into this place. And what do you get out of that? His expression did not change, but something in his gaze sharpened just slightly. Control, he said, without hesitation. Without apology, the word hung between us, clear and unfiltered. I looked at him, really looked this time, not just at the surface. Not just at the power he carried so easily, but at the intention behind it. The way everything he said connected back to one thing. Control over situations, over outcomes, over risks, and now, somehow, over me being part of it. I swallowed slowly, realizing that this was not about being trapped, not in the way I first thought. It was about being pulled into something structured, something deliberate, something that did not allow randomness to exist without consequence. And as I stood there in the quiet of a place that felt both safe and unfamiliar, I understood something I had been resisting. I left the curtains open before dawn and listened to the city as if it might warn me first next time. Morning did not feel like morning in that place. It felt like time had paused somewhere between decisions and consequences. The city outside still moving but muted behind layers of glass and distance. I had not slept much, maybe an hour at most, drifting in and out of thoughts that refused to settle. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that moment again, the red dot, the choice, the shift. I stood in the kitchen now, if it could even be called that, everything too clean, too precise, like it had never been used for anything ordinary. I wrapped my fingers around a mug of coffee I did not remember making, the warmth grounding me just enough to stay present. Adrian was already awake, of course he was, standing near the window like he had been there all night, like sleep was optional in a world that required constant awareness. "You did not sleep," he said without turning, not a question, just an observation. I took a small sip, letting the bitterness settle. "Neither did you," I replied. He almost smiled at that, just enough to acknowledge the truth without confirming it. "I do not need to," he said. And somehow I believed him. I leaned against the counter slightly, watching him now instead of the city, trying to understand the rhythm of this place. The rules that were not spoken but clearly existed. "So what happens today?" I asked, because yesterday had been reaction, instinct, survival. But today felt like something else, something more deliberate. He turned then, his attention fully on me. "Today we start finding answers," he said, simple, controlled, like it was already in motion. I set the mug down carefully, crossing my arms again without thinking. "And what does that look like for me?" I asked. He stepped closer, not rushed, not hesitant, just intentional. "It looks like you staying here," he said, "and paying attention." I exhaled slowly, a small shake of my head following. "You keep saying that like I am part of this," I said. He did not argue, did not correct me, just held my gaze. "You are," he replied, and there it was again. That same certainty that made everything feel less like a conversation and more like a reality I had to accept. I pushed off the counter, pacing a few steps without realizing it, the energy in my body restless, searching for an outlet. "I am not trained for this," I said. "I am not one of your people." He watched me move, not interrupting, not dismissing, just observing. "Exactly," he said, and that made me stop, turning back toward him. "That is not reassuring," I replied. He tilted his head slightly, considering me. "It is not meant to be," he said. "It is meant to be accurate." I let out a quiet breath, frustration and something else mixing together, something I could not fully name. "Then why involve me at all?" I asked. "Why not just keep me out of it?" He stepped closer again, closing the space between us just enough to make his presence impossible to ignore. "Because you are already in it," he said quietly. "And because you see things differently." I frowned slightly, trying to understand what he meant. Differently how? I asked. He held my gaze, steady, focused. "You are not conditioned to ignore what feels wrong," he said. "You acted without calculating the risk, and that made you unpredictable." I blinked, processing that. "Unpredictable does not sound like a strength," I said. He shook his head slightly. "It depends on who is trying to predict you," he replied. And something about that clicked, not fully, but enough to shift how I saw it. I looked away for a second, my mind moving through everything he had said, everything that had happened, then back at him. "So what? You want me to just keep doing that?" I asked. He nodded once. "I want you to trust what you notice," he said. "Even when it does not make sense yet." The words settled into me slowly. Unfamiliar, but not entirely wrong. I thought back to the restaurant, to that moment, to the way everything had fell off before I even saw the red dot, and how I had almost ignored it, almost convinced myself it was nothing. "And if I am wrong?" I asked, the question quieter now, more honest. He did not hesitate. "Then we adjust," he said. "But if you ignore it, we lose the advantage." I let that sit for a second, then nodded slightly, not fully agreeing, but understanding enough to move forward. The silence that followed was different this time, less uncertain, more focused. Like something had shifted into place, I picked up the mug again, taking another sip, the bitterness no longer surprising, just familiar. "So I stay," I said, more to myself than to him. He did not respond immediately, just watched me, and then, quietly, "For now," he confirmed. I looked at him, really looked this time, not just at the power or the control, but at the way he spoke. The way he made decisions sound inevitable. And for the first time since this started, I felt something unexpected settle beneath the tension, not comfort, not trust, but clarity. I was not here by accident anymore. I was here because of a choice I made. When the car finally pulled away, Adrian signaled one of his men without taking his eyes off the glass. It started small, almost easy to miss, a reflection in the glass that did not match the rhythm of everything else. I was standing near the window again, not because I wanted to, but because my eyes kept drifting there like they were searching for something without asking permission. The city below moved in patterns now, not just noise and light. I could see the pauses, the hesitations, the moments where something did not quite fit, and then I saw it. A car parked across the street, nothing unusual at first, just another black sedan among dozens of others. But it had not moved, not once. Not when the light changed, not when traffic shifted. It stayed exactly where it was, like it was waiting. My fingers tightened slightly around the edge of the counter, my heartbeat picking up in a way I recognized now. Not panic, not fear, something sharper. Awareness. I did not speak right away, did not call out. I watched, just like he told me to. Just like instinct had taught me before I even realized it. Counting seconds, tracking movement, or the lack of it. And then the driver's side mirror adjusted slightly. Not enough for most people to notice, but enough for me. A deliberate movement, controlled. And suddenly I knew. I turned slowly, my voice steady even though everything inside me had shifted. "There is someone watching from across the street," I said. Adrian did not react immediately, did not rush to the window, did not question me. He just looked at me, that same assessing gaze locking in like he was confirming something he had already suspected. "Which car?" he asked, calm, precise. I pointed without hesitation. "Black sedan, third spot from the corner. It has not moved since I noticed it," he nodded once. Then moved to the window, not quickly, not urgently, just enough to see without drawing attention. His eyes scanned the street for a second, then returned to me, and that was enough. I did not need him to say anything to know I had seen it right. One of his men appeared in the doorway seconds later, like he had been waiting for a signal that never had to be spoken. Adrian gave a small nod in the direction I had indicated, no words, just confirmation, and the man disappeared just as quickly. I exhaled slowly, my shoulders lowering slightly, not in relief, but in recognition. This was real now, not just something he had explained, not just something I was trying to understand. I had seen it, I had called it out, and it had mattered. "You see the pattern," Adrian said quietly, his voice closer now. I turned toward him, still holding on to that awareness like it might disappear if I let go. "It does not fit," I said, more certain now, more grounded in what I was noticing. He nodded once. "Exactly," he replied. "People think attention is loud, obvious, but the real kind is quiet, patient. It waits." I looked back toward the street, the car still there, still perfectly still, and I felt something shift again, not fear this time. Something closer to understanding. "They are not reacting to us," I said slowly. "They are waiting for something." He watched me for a second, then gave a slight nod. "Good," he said. "You are starting to think like it matters." I frowned slightly at that. "It does matter," I said. And he did not correct me, which somehow felt like confirmation. A few minutes passed, the silence stretching but not empty, filled with observation instead of uncertainty. And then the car moved, slowly, pulling away from the curb like nothing had happened, like it had just been another vehicle in the flow of traffic. I tracked it until it disappeared into the distance, my breath steady, my focus sharp. "They know we noticed," I said, the realization settling in as naturally as the first one had. Adrian stepped closer again, his presence steady, controlled. "Or they got what they needed," he replied, and that sent a chill across my skin, because I did not know which was worse. I turned to him fully, the question already forming. "What does that mean for me?" I asked, because everything seemed to come back to that now, my place in this. His answer came without hesitation, without softness, but not without clarity. "It means you are no longer invisible," he said, And this time, I understood exactly what he meant, not just the words, but the weight behind them. I had been seen, not just by him, not just by the people in that room, but by someone out there who had been watching, waiting, and now adjusting. And as I stood there, no longer just reacting, but actively noticing, I said nothing else. Adrian marked the block on the screen and sent 2 guards downstairs. The silence after the card disappeared did not feel like relief. It felt like the room had finally admitted what the city already knew. Someone had seen me act, and now I existed inside a problem that was bigger than a single shot in a restaurant. I stayed near the window, scanning the street for the sedan even after it was gone. Adrian gave me a few seconds before he crossed the room. He did not crowd me. He did not soften the truth either. "They saw you," he said. He said it as a completed fact, not a warning. I folded my arms, more to hold my thoughts in place than to defend myself. "Then tell me what happens next," I said. "Do they watch me? Do they grab me? Do they wait until you are not there?" He looked down at the street once, then back at me. "They test you first," he said. "People like that do not waste effort on guesses. They create a pattern and see if you break it again." The answer should have terrified me. Instead, it sharpened everything. A test meant there was intent behind the chaos. Intent meant it could be read. "So that is what I am now," I said. "A variable in somebody else's plan." Adrian's gaze held mine. "Only if you stay a variable." I let that sit for a moment, then asked the question that had been building since the restaurant floor. "Why do you keep acting like I chose this on purpose?" He was quiet long enough for the rain to fill the room. Then he said, "Because instinct reveals more than explanation." I frowned. That is not an answer. He stepped closer, still controlled, still unreadable. Then asked the better question. I hated that he was right. I also hated that part of me was already learning how he thought. So I asked it plainly. "Why do you care why I moved?" Something shifted in his expression then. It was not softness or warmth. It looked more like recognition. "Because no one throws themselves in front of a bullet for a stranger without carrying a reason they live by," he said. "And reasons matter more than fear." The words pressed against something in me I had been avoiding all night. He was not asking for a heroic speech. He was trying to understand whether I would run the next time something ugly appeared. That realization unsettled me in a way the gunfire had not. It meant he had been listening for more than facts. He had been measuring conviction. Nobody in my life had ever treated a waitress's split-second choice like a key that could open a locked room. Adrian did, and that made the space between us feel sharper than gratitude and more dangerous than attraction. I looked back at the city. There were easier answers I could have given him. I could have said panic. I could have said bad timing. I could have said I was stupid. None of them were true. "Because no one else moved," I said. My voice came out quieter than I expected, but it did not shake. Everyone saw a powerful man. I saw a target. Everyone waited for somebody else to do something. I could not stand there and watch that happen. Adrian did not answer right away. That silence felt different from the ones before. It had weight, and it had direction. When I finally turned back, his eyes were fixed on me with a focus that sent something through my chest, sharp and immediate. "That was your first mistake," he said. The line should have sounded cruel. It did not. It sounded personal. I stared at him. "Saving you." He tilted his head once. Believing that after a choice like that, you could still go back to being invisible. The city lights reflected across the glass behind him. For the first time that night, I understood the shape of the trap clearly. It was not only danger from the men outside. It was the fact that Adrian had seen exactly what I was made of, and men like him never unlearned useful truths. What happened after that should have felt like instruction, but it felt more intimate than that. Adrian led me to the bank of screens near the center of the room and activated feeds from streets I knew by memory, but not by pattern. The feeds showed intersections, garage exits, loading docks, rooftops, and corners I had crossed 100 times while thinking about late bills and cold coffee. Under his attention, the city stopped looking random. It became a machine made of habits, angles, and people pretending not to look where they were really looking. "If you stay, you learn to read pressure before it becomes violence," he said. "If you do not, you become easy to place." I stood beside him and forced myself to slow down. At first all I saw was movement. At first all I saw were brake lights, pedestrians, umbrellas, and delivery vans. Then the details began separating from the noise. A car that stayed in shadow too long. A man near a kiosk who never bought anything. A courier who touched his earpiece every time the garage door opened 3 blocks away. Adrian did not tell me where to look. He watched to see whether I would find the fault lines myself. That irritated me enough to sharpen my focus. He let the silence do the work on purpose. Every second he refused to guide me felt like a test of patience, pattern, and nerve. By the time I started seeing what he saw, I understood the lesson beneath the lesson. In his world, no one handed you certainty. You earned it by noticing what everyone else dismissed. That one, I said at last, pointing to a narrow side street on the 3rd screen. A woman stood beneath an awning with a shopping bag that never changed hands. She kept glancing at a mirrored office tower, not the storefront beside her. Why? Adrian asked. I kept my eyes on the feed. Because she is not waiting. She is marking time. Her body is still, but her attention keeps checking a reflection. She is not watching the street. She is watching what the street gives back. He shifted the camera angle without comment and revealed a second man in the reflection, half hidden behind a newspaper box. A flicker of certainty rose in me. I had been right. Adrian looked at me then with something more deliberate than approval. Again, he said. So I kept going. A van circling the block without stopping. 2 motorcycles separated by 3 lights and the same pause pattern. A suited man leaving a hotel through the staff exit with shoes too clean for service work. Each time I named the inconsistency, Adrian confirmed it with another angle, another feed, another piece of context that snapped into place after the fact. By the 5th read, the room felt different. It was not safer, only clearer. You notice shape before motive, he said. That is rare. I crossed my arms. You say that like it is a compliment. It is an assessment, he replied. Then, after half a beat, compliments are less useful. I should have rolled my eyes. Instead, I almost smiled. The moment surprised both of us. He saw it. I knew he saw it because his expression changed by barely anything, and yet the entire space between us felt newly precise. He was still dangerous, still controlled, still a man whose orders moved armed people across a city. But he was no longer reading me like a disruption alone. He was starting to account for me. That distinction mattered more than I wanted it to. So this is what happens now, I said. You keep me here and turn me into another set of eyes. No, he said. I keep you alive long enough to decide whether you become a liability or an advantage. The rest depends on you. The honesty should have offended me. It steadied me instead. At least he never dressed control up as kindness. I looked back at the screens and found a 4th anomaly before he asked. A man in a parking structure who kept changing floors without leaving his car. Adrian gave one short nod. It should not have felt like anything. Somehow it did. Adrian marked the parking structure on the screen and told one of his men to lock the lower lifts. The first real break came 13 minutes later. One of Adrian's men spoke through an earpiece and froze halfway through the update. Adrian took the call from him without looking away from the screens. I watched his expression go colder by degrees, which was somehow more alarming than anger. Service access on the east side, he said after a moment. 2 down, 1 missing. Soren sent harbor men. Adrian had been fighting Victor Soren for months over a vanished customs ledger that could expose half the harbor and buy the rest. The words were flat. The room moved instantly. Men who had been silent became motion. Doors unlocked. A wall panel slid back to reveal a weapons cabinet I had not even noticed. I should have stepped away. Instead, I looked at the screen Adrian had left on the lower left corner and felt a knot pull low in my chest. A maintenance corridor camera showed only an empty passage, a mop bucket, and a door that had almost finished closing. Almost. That door, I said. He turned. What about it? I pointed. It should have settled already. Someone caught it and released it late. Adrian was already moving before I finished. He gave 3 clipped orders into his comms and pulled me with him toward the hall. His hand closed around my wrist only once, but the contact carried more force than a grip. It said, "Move now and stay with me." The penthouse corridor opened into a private service junction with mirrored panels, storage doors, and one blind corner that suddenly looked too useful. My heart pounded hard enough to hurt. Adrian stepped slightly in front of me as his men swept left. I saw the thread of breath before the others did. I did not see a body at first. I saw a reflection and then a shadow shifting inside polished steel at the exact height of a raised arm. "Right side," I said. The shot came a second later. Adrian caught my shoulder, and drove me behind the wall as glass burst across the corridor. His guards returned fire. The sound was short, violent, and over in pieces. When the noise stopped, one intruder was down and another had vanished through the service stairwell. A phone clattered across the floor and kept ringing. Nobody touched it until Adrian picked it up himself. He put it on speaker without changing expression. A distorted voice filled the corridor. Hand over the waitress, and this stays business. Keep her, and it becomes personal. My skin went cold. Adrian did not glance at me. He looked straight into the mirrored panel where the city flickered behind our reflections. You made it personal the second you missed, he said. The line was quiet enough that the man on the call laughed first, then stopped. There was something in Adrian's voice that made even a threat sound like bookkeeping. You are rewriting the map for a girl you met tonight, the caller said. Soren only wanted the port ledger back until she interfered. Adrian answered without hesitation. No, I am correcting a misunderstanding you created. He ended the call and handed the phone to one of his men. Then he turned to me fully. There was glass in his hair and blood on his cuff again. None of it was his. You stay where I tell you, he said. He did not bark it, but there was no room to negotiate. I should have argued. I should have told him I was not something he could position like furniture or a weapon. Instead, I heard the echo of the voice on the phone and understood why his control had sharpened. This was no longer about the restaurant. They were not testing a witness anymore. They were announcing interest. Adrian saw the realization land on my face. Now you understand, he said. I nodded once because there was no point pretending otherwise. For the first time since I had met him, his gaze dropped briefly to the spot where he had pushed me behind cover. Not my face. The beat at my throat. Then back to my eyes. The gesture lasted less than a second. It still felt intimate enough to unsettle me. Someone sealed the stairwell behind us while the dead man's phone kept glowing on the floor. The elevator alarm was the sound that brought the opening image roaring back to life. 1 second, Adrian's words were still in the air. The next, the private lift at the far end of the penthouse shuttered and opened on smoke, shattered lighting, and 2 men moving far too fast. Security reacted. So did the attackers. The first volley took out the sculpture wall and sent a rain of stone dust across the floor. Adrian moved toward me at the same instant I moved toward the nearest column, and for a heartbeat we collided in the same instinct again. That should have made me laugh. Instead, it made me understand how quickly 2 people could become a pattern. One intruder went down near the lift. Another crashed through the side corridor. The third came from where no one expected him. A maintenance panel beside the wine room burst open, and before I could turn fully, a hand locked around my arm and yanked me backward. The gun pressed against my head so hard that my vision narrowed for a second. Everything stopped. It did not matter that 3 guards still had clear angles. It did not matter that the attacker was already bleeding. The room froze because I had become the center of the equation. The man behind me dragged me toward the broken wall of glass and shouted for a clear exit. He wanted cars ready below, a route through the loading dock, and a promise that nobody would follow. Rain blew through the fractured opening and struck my face in cold needles. I could see half the city from that height. Towers, bridges, red brake lights sliding like veins through the dark. Adrian stood 10 feet away with one hand empty and the other slightly raised, not in surrender, but in restraint. He was choosing the exact amount of stillness that kept everyone else from doing something stupid. His guards looked ready to die for a signal. His enemies looked ready to kill for one. Then Adrian gave the line I had heard at the start of the night and still did not know how to measure. She dies, the city burns. No one moved after that. Not because the threat was dramatic. Because every person in that room believed him. The man behind me believed him too. I felt it in the way the barrel shifted once against my skin. Adrian took one slow step forward. You came for me, he said. So stop hiding behind what I have chosen to keep. Hearing him call me chosen hit harder than the gun. Something changed in the attacker's breathing. He had expected rage. He had expected negotiation. He had not expected to hear possession stated that plainly. The hesitation was tiny. It was enough. I drove my heel down on his foot and dropped my weight the same way I had thrown myself at Adrian in the restaurant. The shot went wide into the ceiling. Glass flashed. Adrian crossed the distance before the echo died. He hit the attacker once, hard enough to break the hold, then turned and pulled me behind him as his security finished the rest. The fight ended in seconds. The silence afterward felt unreal. Rain entered through the broken wall. Somewhere below, sirens changed direction, and a voice over Adrian's earpiece confirmed that the missing runner had been caught at the loading dock with Soren's ledger drive in his coat. That drive explained the entire attack. Soren had wanted leverage first, revenge second, and my interference had forced both motives into the same reckless night. Adrian checked me with one look that was faster than touch, and somehow more intimate. "Are you hurt?" "No," I said, though adrenaline was still everywhere. He nodded once, then dismissed the room with a glance so sharp the surviving guards moved before the order fully formed. We were left near the shattered edge of the penthouse. The whole city spread below us, bright and restless, like it had no idea how close it had come to belonging to one man's grief. I wrapped my arms around myself and finally looked at him without chaos between us. "You meant that?" I said. He did not ask what I meant. "Yes." The answer came immediately. It was clean and terrifying. I swallowed. "The city burns." His eyes stayed on mine. "If they touch what is mine, they do not get to keep theirs." The words should have made me step back. Instead, they settled somewhere deep and dangerous, because I understood what he was giving me in the same breath that he was taking something. Protection. Claim. No space between them. I had spent my whole life mistaking safety for distance. Standing there, I understood a harsher version of it. Safety could also mean becoming important enough that a dangerous man built his entire night around your survival. That realization should have pushed me away. Instead, it held me in place, breathless and brutally aware. He looked out over the lights for one quiet second, then back at me. "You saved me when you could have looked away, Emily." Men spend their whole lives trying to earn a place beside me and fail because they arrive with ambition before loyalty. You arrived with neither, only instinct and courage. The wind moved through the broken glass and lifted the edge of my hair. My knees still felt unsteady, but my voice did not. And now, Adrian's expression did not change. "Now you understand why you do not walk away after saving a man like me." He was not asking. He was not warning. He was closing the distance between accident and fate with a single sentence. Below us, the city kept glowing. Above us, dawn had not arrived yet. Between those two things, in a penthouse full of shattered glass and men who would die before letting anyone reach me again, I finally understood the most dangerous truth of the night. Below us, Adrian's men were already hauling Soren's last runner into custody as dawn began to thin the clouds over the river.